we asked for your questions for our podcast special on Extreme E, not realising that we would gif on for so long that we would have to eventually end the recording before we drove podcast producer Rob to homicide. And so we have instead decided that we would do a short segment. We loved all your questions, but we are aware that question and answer segments tend to get slightly out of hand time-wise with us. So we thought that we'd just answer them separately so that you got what you were looking for, hopefully, and none of us got murdered. So the first question that we got sent in was from Katy, who's a big supporter of Inside Electric. From a viewer's point of view, there will be big gaps between the races. What do you think Extreme E need to do to make a season feel like a season, to bind it together and keep up the interest in between? Which I think is a really good question, to be honest, and something that Formula E has struggled with.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm just looking at the schedule right now, and there's a big gap between Nepal and Greenland. So it's going to be like from May to August, and then from Greenland to Brazil, which is the season finale. That's another 2 month gap.
Yeah, so you're looking at, Formula E, sometimes we get 6 week gaps, but you're looking at almost quarter of a year as a gap. I actually think that's kind of fine for a series like Extreme E, where the purpose is to turn up, and they're not just there for the 2 days. They're not there as a media circus. There's not going to be loads of roving journalists who are following this round. They're there for a little while. The Helena is going to turn up before, and all of the crews and stuff are going to turn up before those 2 days where the actual sort of live events take place. And they're going to be recording so much content. You're going to have the scientific team working. You're going to have the exploration teams working. You're going to have the documentary teams working. And to give them that breathing space gap to be able to do that work means that you will have that content, and you'll have lots of things that you can put out. For a lot of race series, they can really only reflect the race weekends because that's what they do. But because Extreme E's scope and ambition is so large, there's going to be so much that they can take away, and because they are their own media, so it's not as though anyone else will be covering this particularly because of the nature of it. It's not like they're going to set up a little media center for us, unless they let me on the boat. The campaign continues.
Yes, indeed. The lobbying continues. Yes.
But yeah, I think that gives the championship a huge amount of control, or a huge amount of scope more than control, especially because they've already confirmed that they are diversifying within themselves various teams like the scientific team, the documentary team, etc. So there will be separate teams doing lots of different stuff. And I think the broad scope of it, as well as the fact, you can just replay rallying on boards for 3 months. That's fine.
Pretty much,
I'm not doing this.
Pretty much just highlights package. I mean, if you look at Sky Sports, they just replay old races in between.
Yeah, I mean, maybe let's not use that model. I don't know if I want to find out what the Extreme E equivalent of the Johnny Herbert story is.
So I don't think I'm not sure how important it is to sort of maintain cohesion over the course of a season. I do know what Katy is talking about, because there's going to be a championship narrative that's going to sort of be woven through the series in terms of like the team, and also the drivers' championship, which is very important, of course. But I think in between, the big challenge is going to be sort of maintaining interest in the championship. And I think in this sense, Extreme E is actually kind of at an advantage, because part of their existence is the social mission of showcasing what is going on with climate change with respect to these areas that they're going to race. So I think in between the races, they can definitely put out more sorts of content that really sort of showcase what is really happening on a much more, shall we say, granular level than is possible during the course of a race broadcast. So they can actually sort of parcel it out over the, however many weeks or however many months during in between. So I do think that they can do it. It just it's and again, it's sort of the first. It reminds me of the first season of Formula E and how sort of haphazard it was at the time. It was like, hey kids, let's put on a play, and everyone just had a tent, and it was just like, it was very, very rudimentary.
I mean, at least there is a calendar that we're fairly sure is going to happen.
Yeah. So and there's a website, so it's actually much more organized compared to the initial stage.
There's already photos of things. I mean, like, come on.
Yeah, they're spoiling us.
We've got a car. It's just like it's like I think the bar,
and all of them work to our knowledge. So
the bar has been set quite high in terms of the expectations of the sort of production values and the sort of presentation of the series, which I think it's a good thing to have that expectation, because people now see what was possible with Formula E. Now it's thriving, and now we're just kind of taking it to the next level. So I
think both of you hit the nail on the head. I mean, as Hazel was saying, there's going to be such a plethora of content that's possible over a race weekend. It's very different in the sense to something like Formula One, like you say, a media circus. It arrives in town for 3-4 days and then they jump to the next one. Whereas with Extreme E, it's much more than just a race that's going to be happening there. There's going to be so much, like you say, with the scientific committee, and within that already there's so much that they can cover that might not necessarily appeal to every single motorsport fan, but for other people out there that are more interested in the impacts of global warming and things like that, they'll take an interest in that. And hopefully, I'm sure Extreme E's mission is to get motorsport fans interested in climate change and actually realize what's going on with it, and that although a lot of us still watch and like motorsports that aren't all electric, maybe they have hybrid power units or whatever, to sort of realize that it is possible to go racing with all electric cars, and it can actually be quite fun.
Yeah, something I found really interesting when I went to the launch in 2018 was I asked Fisher Stevens, who was saying, like, this is a platform that I'm interested in being involved in and being part of the documentary team around, because it's a way of getting people interested in climate change, which is like his big mission. And I sort of said, like, well, motorsport's quite niche. Like, do you think that climate change people will be interested in racing SUVs around destroyed landscapes? And he was like, well, there's a lot bigger audience for sport than there is climate change. And which was to me a really interesting perspective, because it's not quite how I think of it, because I think of motorsport is this niche thing that I think about, but everyone I know worries about climate change. But actually, relatively few people consume climate change related media, partly because it's so stressful. And so
it's very uncomfortable.
Extreme E is kind of within its own structure trying to put lots of things together that make it hopeful and optimistic, and where it's not going to be sort of like pure gloom and doom, and there is that sort of sporting element that kind of is the spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, but like it makes it that much more bearable to think about. And because the situation is so dire, it is really hard to think about and really hard to deal with. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Relatedly, Two fairly similar questions that we got. One from Revenger210, which was, given the series will be rallying it up in areas affected by climate change, such as areas of the Amazon from the fires last year, how do you think Extreme will handle the balance of awareness and the feel that they might be contributing to further endangerment of those areas? And Dr. Ashley Pribble asked, or Pribble, sorry, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. What measures will be taken to ensure sustainability through the series, i.e. travel, scheduling, community development? Katy, I think you, because you spoke to Alejandro, you're probably sort of best placed to give it straight from the horse's mouth, as it were.
Well, I mean, I did speak to him several months ago and a lot has passed since then, but I can also understand where these questions are coming from. I mean, when Extreme became really prominent in the motorsport media last week, when Lewis Hamilton announced that he was going to be bringing a team there, quite a lot of people couldn't quite understand the concept that if we're going to these really endangered and vulnerable places, why are we then sending all these electric SUVs to go and damage it further? And I think, obviously, that's not the case. We're not going to be going at the areas that have been severely damaged, but instead racing probably in close proximity to them and addressing and, showcasing what's happened. But
I think actually they are going to the severely damaged areas. It's that they won't be damaging further areas.
Oh, okay, right.
Or that's certainly how I've understood it at every point when I've interacted with them. They're basically going to the places that are like you can't really do much more worse to them.
Right. Okay.
So rather than horsing around on the Russell Glacier, such as it remains, they'll horse around on the destroyed stuff that where the glacier should be.
Yeah.
Although it should also be noted that they're taking a very sustainable approach to building courses and that there is all this scientific support, and they contracted explorers to look at the impact and where they could best be and do things. So even in going to very heavily, because initially they were sort of talking about racing on trash and stuff, for instance, which I think they've sort of peeled that back, but they're going to areas that have been very damaged. And the idea is that they leave them less damaged. So although they race on the damaged place, they're investing in then repair and in community projects and in research and help to address the specific problems of that area at the same time as using it as a platform to highlight the sheer level of damage in particular areas.
Right. Okay. Well, to answer part of the question that you were saying, so measures that will be taken to ensure sustainability throughout the series, a huge part of that is going to be reliant on the floating paddock, the St. Helena, which I believe used to be a Royal Mail ship and has now been completely sort of gutted out and replaced and made more sustainable and environmentally friendly. As Hazel was explaining in the podcast that we just recorded, there are several things that have been put in place to counteract the bad parts of the ship that made it so bad for the environment. But within this floating paddock, they've got scientific labs in there. They have garages for all the cars. They've got accommodation in there. Lewis Hamilton's burger joint, Neat Burger, is going to be sort of the official food supplier. So they're ensuring that all their food source is sustainable. The scheduling is reflected in the gaps that we see in the calendar, which is something we discussed earlier in this Q&A. So lots has been put in place to make it as sustainable as possible. But yeah, Alejandro, I mean, I'm trying to remember what he said all those months ago. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot that's being planned.
It's an integral part of how they're approaching the entire.
Yeah. It's always in their mind, obviously, when developing a series. And Alejandro has got so much experience now with the rapid improvements that we've seen in Formula E. Like, he's the perfect person to be navigating this championship in the right direction.
So another question from Owen Hale, who's a big supporter of Inside Electric. We love him. Should Extreme E and Formula E coexist in a marketing sense, similar to F1/F2, F3? Will the races be advertised on each other's brands? Similarly, could we see Formula E engage more broadly with other upcoming electric motorsport series? So I'm guessing that by that, Owen is potentially referencing things like Project E, the World Rallycross electric version, which hopefully we'll be doing a podcast with quite soon. Pure ETCR, which is the electric touring cars, Moto E, which is now heading into its second season, or ERA
EWRC.
Championship, which is just launching and is a sort of cross between Formula Student and a feeder series. Or Robo Race, which obviously Formula E has kind of shared tracks with in the past, and will again in the future, actually. Oh my God, what am I thinking of? Airspeeder, we will also be doing some stuff with. So yeah, like there is, if you're not aware, there is sort of mostly quite nascent. So nothing's as old as Formula E at a massive age of 7 or whatever it's at. But there are quite a lot of new and very, very legitimately launched series happening at the moment. So yeah, I guess Peter, you're into marketing. You love a bit of brand synergy.
To answer Owen's question, yes, and that's the answer.
Okay. Yes.
Because I am.
It's always going to be a bit of a love-in, isn't it?
I mean, frankly, I'm quite tired of just having the sort of comparisons between series. It's just because it does get a bit like sort of snipey and snarky in between series. So I just like, especially when it comes to electric racing, a rising tide lifts all boats. So I think. And that's not a climate change metaphor. I was just like, it would be
one other
really
reason
nice
to get on the boat.
Yes, back to lobbying for the boat. No, I think it's a brilliant idea to sort of leverage the Formula E's presence in the motorsport space to sort of leverage that in the same way that I think about it in like show business. You know how when you have a really established TV show and then following that they would debut a new show in the hopes of sort of getting a new audience. I think Formula E should definitely partner with Extreme E and just do a bit more sort of cross promotion of the two series. Well, not that Formula E really needs any more promotion because they do quite well on their own, but I think Extreme E could definitely benefit from that exposure. And I mean, we saw what happened when Lewis Hamilton was involved and announced his team X44, and it just everyone's just googling what is Extreme E on
it would be cool if Formula One saw Extreme E as more compatible with a cross promotion with themselves. Because Extreme E is, I mean, not that I think there's ever been kind of like a direct competition element between Formula E and Formula One. I think they're very different things. And the idea that they're sort of trying to cancel each other out is silly. But because Extreme E is so different, it would be nice if there was a little bit of kind of give and take and maybe a little bit more interest in something that is so different,
especially because all the drivers who have expressed interest in the drivers program are from other series. So it's just like, there's a lot of to and fro.
The WEC or WRC or IndyCar kind of giving it
Yeah.
WEC and WRC are also FIA. Extreme E is not FIA. It should be acknowledged. Yes. And I doubt it ever will be. It's not kind of. No. It's not that kind of regulated series in that sense. Speaking of drivers, the last question that we got, and I think this is a really good one, and we're probably going to end up in a really big debate about this.
How funny would it be if we all picked the same drivers?
Natasha Henry, who's a really good journalist who covers Formula E for the Telegraph, and you should follow her and look at her stuff. She does a lot of football as well as motorsport. Asked if Team X44 opts for British drivers, who would you like to see behind the wheel?
So British drivers.
Yeah, my female my female racing driver, I would love
remember you need a male and a female.
Yeah, I would
okay.
love to see Jamie Chadwick in a seat like that.
You don't think she'd go to Veloce?
True. I mean, that's an obvious link, but for the sake of this podcast and for the sake that I just forgot Veloce existed for a split second, I'm going to stick with my answer.
Okay. Answers other than Tom Longfist.
Okay. So what about your male driver, Katie?
So somebody who's on the driver list and that they have an interest in it, and I just would be fascinated to see how it worked, is Billy Munger. He's put his interest down. And he knows Lewis Hamilton very well. Lewis has been an absolute star with him after he obviously had his accident a few years ago. And Billy's somebody who has had Lewis Hamilton as his idol since he was, tiny. But I think that would be a really interesting partnership. I'm not sure how it would work with the car, because obviously you would have to switch seats and things like that, and whether there'd have to be any modifications for Billy's disability that he has. But yeah, I think in an ideal world that would be a pretty awesome partnership. What about you, Peter?
I was looking at all the drivers. For my female driver, I would absolutely pick Catherine Legg, because I think this sort of like electric off-road kind of thing is just about the only discipline that she hasn't driven. And I would absolutely love to see her in there. And then for my male driver, this is a bit out of left field, but I'd love to see Ben Collins in there.
That would be cool.
The white Stig on Top Gear. And the reason I kind of picked him is also his book is really good. His biography is really good. The reason I picked him is because I remember him in the Bowler Tomcat while he was on Top Gear, and he was really good at it. Like he was really good in the sort of like off-roady motocross, sort of like mixed asphalt gravel kind of conditions. So I kind of want to see how he would do.
That would be pretty cool.
Extreme E car, and of course, you would just say you could make all the Stig jokes. Which is great for marketing.
Nice. Hazel?
So for my male driver, I would pick Michael Eastwell, who is a driver who has been sniffing around Formula E and the iPo series for some time. He's one of those drivers who's never really had funding to get very far, but he's been quite overall successful in Formula Ford, which has basically been the highest level he's managed to get to. I'd love to see him in a decent ride, and I think he'd be somebody who was very committed to it, who has a strong interest in electric motorsport. I've seen him and also electric GT looking for stuff, and he's a really just like sweet, interested dude. He's quite young, so I think that would be good for the series. And yeah, he would be my pick for a male driver. For a female driver, I have so many drivers I would like to pick that they are literally coming out of my ears. Katie Munning would obviously be a great pick. Rally driver, European ladies rally champion. She presents a great CBeebies show.
Yes,
called Katie's Amazing Machines, that I really love and have probably watched the entire series of a million times. And even though I'm probably at least 30 years too old for the demographic, but it's really worth it. Totally have a look at that. I would love to see Nabila Chapar, who's another British rallying. She's the British Rallying Championship Ladies Champion. She's not had a particularly straightforward career, but it would be fantastic to see her in the sport. She's very, very talented, but another one of these people who has never got the break. And finally, the one who I actually have to pick, because my God, she deserves it more than almost anyone. She is so hardworking and has done such extreme things to stay in the sport and to stay able to compete, is Louise Cook. Like, she has gone beyond anything of any other driver at her level to compete. She once drove for 36 hours in her rally car to compete in Rally Turkey because she got the funding so late to compete. And this is in WRC.
Wow.
That she had to drive the car there herself, and then she placed decently in it, and then she had to drive it back, so it wasn't even like she could risk wrecking the car. She has sold all her trophies to try and compete. She's done crowdfunding, an incredible amounts of rounds. She obviously has no testing. She never has any downtime. She carried on having I think she actually has a day job now. And she has worked excruciatingly hard to be able to continue competing. And I would love to see Louise Cook get recognised with something like this kind of drive. I think she's easily adaptable enough to do it. I think she's more than determined enough to do it. She's an incredible brand ambassador. She does so much work for the brands that give her money. You know, a lot of people go like, oh, well, you know, she hasn't always placed first. Would you have to drive in 36 hours? You know, she's not getting a gentle sports massage and then being given an isotonic drink and a psychological sit down or whatever, you know. I would so love Louise Cook to be given an opportunity in this extraordinary series where she could be given the platform to show how good and how determined she is, and also recognised for what she's done, which over the course of her career has been really tremendous. She's one of a very small number of working class people in motorsport, and I think that plays well to Lewis Hamilton himself and his background to some extent. So
yeah. Well, all good choices. I'm very interested to see who he picks. But yeah, I think all worthy drivers that deserve their shot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you all for sending us questions. We really appreciate it. And obviously we're always here for anyone who wants to ask questions about electric motorsport, motorsport in general. Or if you just want to ask us questions about journalism, we are always happy to answer those and to talk, whether you want to as an Inside Electric or on our personal accounts. So yeah, thank you all for sending us stuff, and we hope this went some way to answering them at least. So bye from me, Hazel Southwell. And bye from Katy Fairman and PT Leung.